Alexander, explain the situation, go over everything, and I'll just be, I'll jump in and out, but I'll just be looking at the comments from both ODYSEE and Rumble.
Yes.
And if there's a slight pause, it's because I'm not seeing you. And I'm opening and closing windows.
Yes.
So, Alexander, just give us the title of this this stream was Proxy War, Russia versus EU, NATO, and Ukraine, because I feel that we are at the beginnings of what could be a proxy war. And I'm getting nervous. Things are getting very, very dangerous. And it seems like we're in some sort of Cuban Missile Crisis type of scenario where neither side is backing down and both sides appear to be escalating. Being in Greece, I also had some information about Greece that people that are talking about the war, because Greece has inserted itself into the war by providing weapons to Ukraine. People that are inserting themselves in the war are also getting a lot of heat. And Greece doesn't have the best record with safety of journalists, in my opinion. So we all have to be very, very careful as to how this thing is progressing. Anyway, Alexander, that was the title of the live stream. That's my view as to where we're heading.
Yes.
How are you seeing things? And then talk about what you see on the ground, what you see with the economics and the financial war. It's a full-scale financial war as well. A full-scale media war as well, which I'll also say before I'm off and I'm done, a full-scale media war, which Russia is absolutely losing. There is no doubt about that. No doubt about that. And I will leave it there. And I'll be popping in and out, Alexander. So if you see me delayed, don't worry.
I mean, there's three conflicts going on at one and the same time. There's a military conflict which is underway in Ukraine, and here I think now that I want to stress again, I am not a military person. I think the main area of the conflict is in eastern Ukraine. My impression is that the Russians are steadily tightening their grip on eastern Ukraine, and they're in a strong position. They're strengthening their position around Kiev. So the military campaign is, if you like, going Russia's way, as we'd always expected. There is the media campaign, where we've discussed many times how the Russians are disastrously bad at information warfare. In the West, they are losing hands down. I mean, they have absolutely no ability to operate an information war. They don't seem to know how to do it. They're floundering. They're getting this hopelessly wrong. They're allowing the other side to frame the narrative, and it's going very badly for them on that front. The third is the economic war, where each side is taking action against the other. But for the moment, I have to say, it seems to me that the Russians are holding on. Now, more than better, perhaps, than some people had expected, but that's having the effect of making the Western powers even more angry. And so we can't assume that that's finished. So those are three conflicts. And then there is a diplomatic conflict. And here I think we're looking at a completely different picture, because it seems to me that the Western powers are busy talking to each other. The Russians, who are good at diplomacy, are talking to the various other countries that matter in the world. And there it seems to me that they're making ground. So India, China, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, they're all showing an understanding of the Russian position, or at least a willingness to address the Russian position. Iran, too, to some extent, even Turkey, by the way, despite, all the talk about ships and things of this kind. So 4 different conflicts all going on at the same time. Now, I want to make this clear. The 2 most important, we, of course, are caught up in the information war because we are part of the information universe. Even though I want to reiterate what Alex said, we are completely independent. We are 2 guys, and we are not affiliated with either side. We're doing our best to understand and explain these things. But anyway, there's the information war and there's the diplomatic struggle. The information war is, in my opinion, the least important in the way that this outcome will eventually be decided. The diplomatic struggle, I think, is important, but it's not overridingly important. The 2 key ones are the military conflict and the financial one. And here it very much depends now, it seems to me, on what the West does, because it's clear to me, despite all the rhetoric that's been coming out, all the media information about, you know, the Russians losing the war and all of those things, it's clear to me that that's not going to happen. But given that this is now the narrative, people in the West are being swept along by that narrative to a dangerous degree. And the effect of that may be that it will draw them in to start to do things, wild, dangerous, reckless things, which they will subsequently regret and which could have catastrophic consequences for the world. I don't think it's going to happen. The reason I don't think it's going to happen is that I think the uniformed militaries in all the big powers are determined to prevent it happen. The Pentagon is wanting to set up, it seems, a deconfliction hotline with the Russians, and I think they'll be able to hold the line. I hope so, because otherwise that would be catastrophic and the consequences are completely unpredictable. The financial war is causing damage to each side. Russia, of course, is much smaller than the combined West. I mean, we can't even remotely compare. But so far, the uncontrolled collapse of the ruble that I think many people were expecting on Monday has not happened. And Russia is clearly now hunkering down for a long siege with capital controls and all the things that go with that. So I think that's an important war. The military struggle ultimately is the one that is most important. It's where the decision is going to be made in the end.
All right. Where do you want to begin, Alexander? You said it's a three-front war. I agree. Yeah. I did a video and I posted it on Rumble. And I said the exact same thing on my morning update. We have a media war, a financial war, and obviously the ground war. Tackle those three. Where do you want to begin?
Well, I'm going to start with the military war. I mean, I think everybody acknowledges that the Russians are waging this war with one arm tied behind their backs. They've been very, very reluctant either to storm the big cities or to bring out the heavy artillery or to wheel out the bombers, to do all those sort of things. Because for them, that I think they realize would be counterproductive. So I think they've been aiming to do two things. This is my analysis of this. Bear in mind, again, a point which I've made many times, that I'm not a military man. The first is they want to complete the encirclement of the Ukrainian army in the eastern regions of Ukraine. And they seem to be they seem to be very advanced towards achieving that. They've now apparently encircled Mariupol, which is this important city where a lot of hardline Ukrainian forces are concentrated. They seem to be gradually closing the cauldron. So that is what is happening there. At the same time, I think that they are trying to leave the door open for Ukraine to engage in negotiations. Now, this is an important point, which I think people don't realize, which is that, of course, we've had those negotiations in Belarus, which didn't reach any conclusion, but then nobody expected that they would. And the Russians and the Ukrainians have said that they're due to meet again. Now, it seems to me that if the Ukrainians and the Russians intend to meet again, then that argues against a sudden Russian assault on Kiev that will break the Ukrainian government, because the intention, if you're going to negotiate, is that you need a partner to negotiate with. And that means that they want to keep the Ukrainian government intact. So I think the Russian game plan is, and I suspect it's been that all along, is to encircle the Ukrainian army in the east and put enormous pressure on Ukraine, on its government, to negotiate on the kind of things that the Russians are concerned about. First and foremost, neutrality. In other words, no question of entering NATO. And secondly, on the situation in Donbass, a resolution to the situation in Donbass, and some kind of peaceful settlement to the crisis in Ukraine that's existed ever since the events of 2014. So I think that's probably the Russian game plan. I have to say that if it doesn't work, if the Ukrainians dig in their heels, if they refuse to negotiate, then the Russians will be left with a decision about what to do next. And having gone as far as they have, I can't imagine that at that point they will stop. And if they conclude that negotiations are going nowhere, then a storming of Kiev and of the other great cities, Kharkov and the rest, start to look likely. But I think for the moment, they're working to try to create some space for negotiations. The reason I think they want to deal with Ukraine is not, I think, because they expect that that will satisfy the West, but because they want to show to their various foreign partners, China, India, Argentina, Brazil, Iran, all the rest, that they're acting with restraint and that they're acting under extreme provocation. And at the same time, they're open to negotiation and reasonable compromise. And I think that's something that's been quietly agreed with all of these powers. And I think that's why the Russians are going to go down that road. But if, as I said, the negotiations go nowhere, then of course the calculus changes. And I think at that point we will see some kind of decisive action taken. Now, that's the Russian side. There is the Western side. And here we're seeing all sorts of completely irresponsible talk about sending fighter jets to Ukraine, basing them from Poland, using Poland as some kind of base area in which to launch attacks on the Russians. We've had all this talk about, supplying arms to Ukraine, all those kind of things. It's dangerous talk because though it's not going to change the military balance anytime soon, it is the kind of thing that could provoke the Russians into a very, very strong reaction. And that might be catastrophic. I mean, to give an example.
Hello? one second. You tried to ad-lib. 1 sec. How about, okay, you want to say to give an example, but then also talk about...
to give an example. If Ukrainian pilots start engaging in air sorties from Poland, which some people have floated that crazy idea, then there will be demands from the Russian military, I am sure, to respond against the bases they're operating from in Poland. Okay. And that is such a wild and dangerous and reckless idea. Notice that it's been floated by the European Union, by the way, not by NATO. But it's such an irresponsible idea that I think the Pentagon will put its foot down and will stamp on it.
Yeah, I agree with you there. That's what worries me is all of these weapons that are being poured in from various EU countries. The Russian military, the Russian Ministry of Defense has already said that they will. These countries that are arming Ukraine are going to pay some sort of heavy price. What that means, well, we don't know. We don't know. Yes. But another question that I have for you that worries me is the sudden talk in the media and from the Biden White House about a no-fly zone. Now, the Biden White House and Jen Psaki, they went on TV and Jen Psaki gave a press conference. I believe Biden was interviewed, and they said there will not be a no-fly zone created. They were very specific, and they said we're not going to do it. Yes, the media is pushing for it. Yes, people in Congress are pushing for it. There are senators that are pushing for it. Yes, what I worry is just like Biden and all of the leaders, not only Biden, all of the leaders around the world said, you want to get 2 weeks to flatten the curve, no mask mandates, no digital IDs, no this, no that. We all know what happened after a certain amount of weeks. I'm not comparing the two. I'm just saying that, the Biden White House and Jen Psaki, they can say today, no fly zone. But if this conflict drags on, if this does become some sort of quagmire proxy war between EU and Russia inside of Ukraine, I believe that they may, go back on their word and decide to give the no-fly zone a try. What does that mean?
Well, that would be, as Biden said, World War III. For that precise reason, I still don't think it's going to happen. I think that would be an impossible step to take. I think it would be an impossibly dangerous step to take, which is why, by the way, they're talking up the sanctions as being the weapon of choice. I think that the Pentagon would be horrified at that kind of idea, and of course the Russians have already demonstrated that they have their nuclear forces ready, and if there's a situation where NATO forces and Russian forces are engaging each other, well, then the prospects for escalation are out of control. I don't think it's going to happen, but as you absolutely rightly say, hysteria has its own momentum. We've seen that with the sanctions. You remember just a week ago, they're all saying, we won't go down the road of disconnecting Russia from SWIFT or Russian banks from SWIFT. That would be extremely dangerous to do. Nobody was talking, at least not openly, a week ago, of freezing, of sanctioning the Russian central bank. And yet, in the atmosphere of hysteria that built up, it happened. So one can never completely discount that possibility. But I think the uniformed military in the Pentagon are dead against that idea. I think that there is no way it's going to happen myself. I think Biden clearly rules it out. So I hope that line holds. I believe it will hold because, as I said, the situation is so dangerous. I would add that if we start moving towards a no-fly zone situation, the tempo of Russian military operations will accelerate. And I think at that stage, if we start hearing debate about no-fly zones, we will start to see Russian nuclear forces entering places like Belarus and perhaps even Ukraine itself. And then we will be in Cuban Missile Crisis 2 with steroids. I think that's the important thing to understand.
All right, let me just get some of these questions, I guess super chat questions, because it seems that Rumble and ODYSEE, they're not like combining them in one area and they kind of disappear. So let me just get these before they disappear. At first said, sadly, the quality is a bit too high for 2 megabytes internet, 2 Mbits internet. I think ODYSEE streams at a lower bit rate. I'm not sure. Like this is our first go at ODYSEE, but thank you for that tip, that super chat for that tip. And Davol says they should send Vindman and Newland to fight the war they started. Well, a lot of people, a lot of independent commentators do say that. And on Rumble, real quick, Alexander, let's see. Pinterall says Hungary and others seem to be against the last-minute EU membership of Ukraine. Thoughts if this will lead to some type of a civil war in the EU?
I think it could do. I mean, I to be honest, I don't think this is this is the other thing. I mean, there's one must never lose sight of the potential for hysteria to take over. But I mean, the idea of bringing Ukraine into the EU at this time is disastrously misconceived, to put it mildly. I mean, just imagine the refugee flows that would result from that. I mean, you'd have all of these. Anyway, I mean, that's just one thing. So I don't think it's going to happen. I think even the big countries probably would oppose it. But having said that, in an atmosphere of hysteria, it's not impossible. I mean, I would say one particular person, I mean, there's obviously, we've talked a lot about Ursula von der Leyen, who's saying all sorts of crazy things. But the person who, it seems to me, bears a heavy responsibility for whipping the hysteria at the moment is Josep Borrell. He went a year ago on this ludicrous trip to Moscow, where he thought to lecture the Russians. He's clearly somebody who's got the Russians on the brain to an extreme degree. I don't know why. I don't know what the background is. And I'm afraid where his whole policy ought to be to try to calm the situation, he's escalating it, and he's making all kinds of claims and decisions, as far as I can see, on the hoof, which are very, very dangerous and which could easily tip us over into an even worse crisis. So I think that's a point I have to make. I don't think we're going to see Ukraine joining the EU. It's not impossible. I don't think we're going to see no-fly zones or anything like that imposed. I think that's even less possible, but not entirely impossible. And I think in the meantime, we have the hard slog of the economic war and the situation in the military situation on the ground.
Okay, Quickman Sam says, this is what happens when an unstoppable force meets an unmovable object. We're in a full-blown Cold War at a critical turning point. Do you think Russia could or might stop energy exports to the West?
In a state of hysteria, when things are escalating all the time, that is not impossible. I mean, I don't think that's what the Russians want to do at the moment. On the contrary, they're keeping up energy exports, and it is useful to them to do so because it gives them a steady income stream, which is keeping every part of their economy operating. But if things get really bad, they can hunker down, they can go full war economy, they can cut off energy exports. That will create massive knock-on crises, not just in Europe, but around the world. And then, we're in an escalatory economic situation, the likes of which we've never seen. I mean, it would make the Arab oil embargo of the 70s seem minimal, especially if they combine it with a stop on food exports.
Do you believe the reports from Gazprom, which say that the reserves in Europe are at near zero?
Yes. I not only believe it, I saw confirmation of it in, I think, the Financial Times.
So if they do cut off the gas and the oil, that's kind of that's it.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, we've talked about, you remember that Biden administration official some time ago talked about sanctions escalation. And I said that in terms of the economic side of sanctions, the attack on the central bank is as high as sanctions can go from the American European side. For the Russians, cutting off gas and oil exports and perhaps even food exports it is the ultimate level of high sanctions escalation that they can go, and it will have catastrophic consequences in every part of the world. I mean, it could cause huge food shortages in not just Europe and America. I mean, we can absorb those. We've got big thresholds that we can fall back on, though a cut-off in energy supplies would be very difficult. But if you're talking about food, I mean, the crisis in the global south just doesn't bear thinking about. I mean, places like Egypt, places like Saudi Arabia. Bear in mind, Russia is the world's biggest food exporter. Biggest wheat exporter. The second biggest wheat exporter is Ukraine.
What about like the metals, fertilizer? God, there was a whole list of everything that Russia leads in.
All of them, every single one of them.
And Russia, Belarus, Ukraine. I read a list of like everything that they lead as far as exporting goes.
Absolutely,
I don't know if you know.
I mean, absolutely, I know what you're referring to. I mean, chemical all the products that make up chemical fertilizer, essential raw materials to make cars, aluminium, to titanium for airplanes, certain important minerals that are used in semiconductor products. If we go down that route, we are, as I said, in a world where we're not just talking about economic war, we are talking about economic world war. I mean, it would be on a scale that we've never seen before. And again, for that reason, despite all the hysteria being whipped up by people like Borrell, I think that eventually people will pull back as they sort of contemplate the horror of going down that route. I mean, people like Borrell, people like Liz Truss in Britain. I'm afraid that's the other thing I'm going to have to say, is that in an atmosphere of hysteria, demagogues, I'm sorry to use that word about some people, and Borrell and Truss would probably take issue with my using those kind of words. And that senator in the US who talks about
Kissinger. Kissinger. I said Kissinger. Adam Kissinger.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, in conditions of hysteria, demagogues come into their element, and they become particularly dangerous at that point.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to go to locals, Rumble, Odyssey, and I'll pull out questions. Before I get there, I have one more question for you, and then I'll start pulling in questions from the viewers as well. And what I want to ask you is it fair to say that up until this point, the collective West has thrown everything that they've got on the media side of things at Russia, and they've thrown everything they've got on the financial sanctions side of things at Russia, while Russia so far has not really taken many steps to retaliate, it seems. Now, maybe on the media side, maybe they're just not equipped. They just don't have the ability to retaliate. That's what I think, but who knows? On the financial side of things, the only retaliation I have seen is just the tit-for-tat airline airspace cancel. That's it. Is that a fair comment to make?
It's an absolutely fair comment. They've held back from doing many of the things that they could potentially do. Well, for two reasons. Firstly, I think that they still want to, as I said, to maintain a stream of foreign funding into their economy. And I mean, their priority at the moment is to hunker down, see this through, get this affair in Ukraine out of the way, achieve whatever their objectives are. And then, as I said, hopefully, or at least they hope, afterwards they'll be able to pick up the pieces. They'll keep their alliances, their system of alliances in the world with China, with India, with Iran, with other countries intact. And so they don't want to press the button of extreme economic counter-escalation. But of course, as we said before, I mean, we talked about demagogues on the one side. We don't know so much about who's saying what on the other. And, you know, within Russia itself, we assume that people there are level-headed, but we can never be completely sure.
All right. Pintera Hall says, I do think the bureaucrats in the West realize what they are getting into. Imagine China, where is it? Imagine China joining Russia in this fight. I wonder now where I will get my toilet paper, to put it lightly.
Well, indeed, exactly. Yeah, I mean, if we have a complete collapse of supply chains, I mean, on top of everything else, I mean, we would be looking at an economic collapse that would make the Great Depression, to be said straightforwardly, look like a holiday. I mean, it would be hideous. So I think that on both sides, as I said, people will try and pull back and exercise restraint. But, you know, you do have some very wild and reckless things being said. I mean, the whole idea of sending fighter jets is just lunacy. By the way, and I think perhaps I should say this. I was going through the British media this morning, and that idea of the fighter jets has barely been mentioned here. I mean, this isn't something that people really want to contemplate. And there isn't very much talk of no-fly zones in Britain. So I still don't think it's going to happen. I think there's been guidance from Whitehall that, you know, these are not going to happen, and please don't talk about this. This is already almost out of control already as it is.
Yeah, I think that Poland also came out with an announcement and said that there are no fighter jets as well. So I think there are people that are pulling back from that. But as we said before, they've made announcements like this in the past, and they've changed.
They've reversed them. Well, I mean, they don't forget. Just a few weeks ago, not weeks ago, 10 days ago, they were saying, well, last week actually, when I was saying last week, they were saying there's no question of any disconnection from SWIFT. That's been ruled out. And then they did it. So it's by the way, that was a symbolic move, not because, in my opinion, as I've said many times, it's the most important one. I mean, as sanctions go, it's, as I said many times, it's been overestimated, but it's seen as a symbol now of how far the West is prepared to go. By the way, can I just say something on SWIFT? I get the impression that some people in Germany are going through, the morning after the night before moment. Then they're saying, what exactly did we do? And that they're now trying to row back on this by trying to avoid de-swifting a number of important banks, and by trying to carve out exemptions and exclusions. The difficulty with doing that is that, of course, there are obviously political problems, because once you've committed to doing something, it's very difficult to pull back. But also, if you're going to SWIFT part of a financial system, then SWIFT itself is going to have trouble working out which parts of the financial system are not de-SWIFTed and which are still operating. So we're going to have all that mess and mix up going on at the same time. But as I said, there have been signals about this from Germany, which suggests to me that some people in Germany are now beginning to wake up to what they've done and are beginning to say to themselves, what exactly was it that we did there?
Okay. Two things to mention, Alexander. The first one is that there are announcements from the Russian Ministry of Defense that say they are planning a strike in Kiev on Ukrainian Intel infrastructure, and they have told the people to evacuate. So there's going to be some stuff going down in Kiev. Okay. And with regards to RT and Sputnik being blocked in Europe, from what I understand from everything that I've gone through, those channels have not been by YouTube. Those channels have not been taken down from YouTube. They've just been blocked from broadcasting in Europe. I don't know what the situation is in the States. So if there's people in the US or Canada, if they can access those channels, I don't think they can, but in Europe and the UK, you can access those channels on YouTube, but they have not been deplatformed. They've just been blocked. So, the thinking there would be if this crisis comes to a conclusion, they would be unblocked, but I don't know. I just wanted to put that out there. Let me get to some questions. Alexander, from Jeff on Locals. On the economic war, has the West miscalculated? Leaders in the West seem to be losing control of events and panicked about the sanction on the bank. Steve Bannon's show this morning talked a lot about the law of unintended consequences and black swan events.
Absolutely. I can tell that is entirely correct. Can I just say something? They disregarded the advice of their own experts. The Federal Reserve Board and the Wall Street banks and the European banks told the politicians, don't do this. They said to them, don't do this. This is a terrible mistake. Don't even think of going here. And they just ignored that and went ahead and did it. And I think that they're now starting to understand that this is creating cracks. It's not the whole system, the whole plumbing, if you like, of the world financial system is now starting to spring leaks in all sorts of places. And it's not impossible that you could see a flood. And one of the results, by the way, is that, of course, some people, as I said, in Germany, are now starting to think, my goodness, what did we do? Other people, of course, are on the contrary saying, well, because they're coming under pressure, because it's been criticized, they're actually doubling down and demanding more. So this is the kind of thing that hysteria does. This is why in these sort of situations, it's so important to keep a level head. Now, nobody up to this moment in Europe or in the US has kept a level head. We've had other periods of crisis when people do maintain some degree of calm and understand the limits to which things can go. And then, eventually things stabilize around them. But because leadership has become so poor, we don't see anybody at the moment exercising that voice of restraint in this kind of situation.
Okay, well, would you say that Russia and Putin have maintained a level head, in your opinion? And because here's a question on Rumble, and it's from a Twisted Manifesto, who says, you've often said that the West dangled Kiev in front of Putin. How exactly did they do that? Also, why would the West do this? Has this all been a plan to try and force a regime change in Moscow? My question to you is, obviously, the leaders in the West are not keeping a level head, and they're getting swept up in this glamour war. And you've talked about this many times, that they're making war to be glamorous.
Yes.
Do you think that Putin has kept a level head in the run up to all of this? And you could start from 6 months ago, or if you want to start from 8 years ago, that's up to you. I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, I think he kept a level head up to now, but the next few days are going to test that to the point of, extreme. Because when I say a level head, I get the overwhelming impression that he took a decision last Thursday, which he felt that he had no ultimate choice to make. But he's not launched all-out war on Ukraine. And I think that was, a calculated decision that he took. He thought that he could calibrate the vents, that he could send the troops in, that they'd clear out the Ukrainian military, that it would be sort of a clean war, that there'd be a Ukrainian government at the end that he could negotiate with and come to some kind of a compromise. I think where he underestimated is, I think that he, again, like many rational people, by the way, and I say that because I think Putin is rational, despite what many people say, that I think he underestimated the power of emotion, including, by the way, the potential power of his own emotion. You can very easily be swept along by events. You could start to see all kinds of wild talk about, bombing Russia, deploying planes in Poland, doing all these radical things, that you start acting in ways that ultimately are contrary to your best interests. Can I give one example? He has been talking now openly about the empire of lies, and he's referring to the United States and the West in that way. Now, many people might agree with that. I wonder whether this is the correct moment during a crisis like this, when maybe at some point there has to be a negotiation, to use that kind of language.
Putin holding back is costing Russian soldiers lives. This is a decision one can make, but that is the result.
I can do. Well, a lot of people, and that's a very good point. And by the way, if you go to pro-Russian websites, I'm not going to name them because I don't want people to. Anyway, but you can see that he's coming under criticism for this, particularly with respect to the situation in Kharkiv, where there's been fighting and Russian soldiers have suffered casualties because Putin has countermanded every request, apparently, for artillery and airstrikes on populated areas.
Yeah. How is China backing Putin?
Well, the Chinese are keeping their positions very, they're balancing, because, of course, from their point of view, they don't want to be seen openly supporting an attack on the territorial integrity of another country. But they're doing it in two ways. Firstly, and you have to go to the Chinese media for this, they are blaming the United States for this whole crisis. They're saying that this entire crisis has been created by the United States through its eastward expansion of NATO, through its encouragement of Ukraine to stand fast and not fulfill the Minsk agreements, and that it's the United States which has deliberately, intentionally created this kind of crisis. So that already backs the Russians in information and diplomatic terms. And it's important to say this. They've said this at the General Assembly at the UN. They've said this at the Security Council. They say these things in the commentaries that they're publishing. There was a very, very tough conversation between Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, and Tony Blinken, in which Wang Yi said all the same things to Blinken all over again. So that's one thing they're doing. They're also saying that they will continue to maintain economic connections with Russia in exactly the same way as always. Now, beyond that, obviously, as this economic war escalates against Russia, at some point, inevitably, the Russians are going to turn to the Chinese. And one area where I think the Chinese may be particularly important is that the advanced parts of Russian industry, the aerospace, the space industry, all of those are actually in pretty good shape and can continue. the weak point in Russia is not advanced industries, it's consumer goods. There they import a lot of products, raw materials from the West to make consumer goods. They also import consumer goods from the West. Now, if those are all going to be blocked, they will want to replace them, because if they don't, obviously there will be inflation, and they don't want that either. So China is good at making consumer goods. There will probably have to be some kind of swaps, Russians providing, perhaps getting debts, RMB debts, who knows, but to import Chinese consumer goods to replace any ones that are withheld by the West.
All right. On the info war, can America sustain the war within America? Strong voices against. Tulsi Tucker, Bannon, Trump, and opinion polls against. And ultimately, the key advocate Biden cannot make the case.
You know, the interesting thing is, Alex perhaps is more closer to this, but my impression is that the US is winning the information war in Europe and not winning it in the US itself. There is much more skepticism about this affair in the US itself than there is in Europe, which is fascinating.
You may have a point. You may have a point. Not saying just not to cut you, not saying that all the US is siding with Russia or not, but
no,
I think you do have a point that there are more people in the US that are skeptical. Europe has definitely fallen into line. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. But if you look at the polling numbers, for example, in the US, it seems to me that the American people are completely unimpressed by what the Biden administration is doing. And I was looking at an opinion poll, and again, it showed that for them, the overwhelming concern are rising prices and all those problems, and that they are absolutely not keen to get the United States into another conflict in Europe against Russia. So it's a paradox. It may be a legacy, by the way, also of Russiagate, which is, I should say that to the extent that Russiagate has been discredited, that fact has been far more widely reported in the United States than it has been in Europe. I mean, Britons don't know about this. I mean, bear in mind, we have far less social media in Britain, and that's even more the case in other European countries. So I think that there is more skepticism about this in the United States itself than there is in Europe. And that is a huge shift, by the way, from what it was the case during the Cold War, when on the contrary, it was the Americans who wanted to go out and take on the Soviets in every place and everywhere and all the time, or at least so it seemed, whereas it was the Europeans who were more nervous and more anxious to keep bridges open and doors open and things of that kind. That, by the way, again, reflects the enormous power that the European Union has established, because the ideologues in Brussels, the Ursulas, the Borrells, the Michels, all of those people are the people who, more than anyone else, as I said, are generating the hysteria at the moment.
Yeah. Everyone needs to remember Ursula von der Leyen's speech the other day when she was closing off the airspace to Russia. She said, over EU territory, we are closing off the airspace all over Europe. Over EU territory. Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt that the ideologues in Brussels, they see the EU as a country, as an entity, as a sovereign entity for which they have full control.
Yeah.
And the leaders in the EU are reinforcing that.
Yes.
Without a doubt.
Yes.
Which is why a country like Greece sends 2 plane loads of weapons to Ukraine. Not saying that Greece has good relations with Ukraine and with Russia, but it would have been much smarter for Greece to have said what Orban in Hungary said, which is, you know what, we can't really send weapons because, you know, we've got all these issues, for example, with Turkey, etc., and we just can't spare any. We have to be careful, or we have issues with our border, and we need to keep those weapons. But they didn't. They've actually sent, I think, to date, 4 plane loads worth of weapons. So anyway,
I would love to know where these plane loads are going.
Poland. Poland. I already know that. Yeah, that's they've reported that. It's not secret.
Okay.
They said it's all landing in Poland. I mean, you always got to remember one thing about Greece that people may not know. Jeffrey Pyatt, who was the person that was speaking with Newland on that famous phone call, the F the EU phone call, after Ukraine became ambassador to Greece. So
yes,
anyway, let's see here. From Domat78, there were obviously a lot that has been done over the last 8 years from the American side to push the Russians in Ukraine. So logically, there should be a follow-up to this now that it happened.
Well, can I just say that is absolutely right. Why are we in this crisis? There's two reasons. Firstly, because of the obsession with expanding NATO East, something that was launched by Bill Clinton in the 1990s, breaking promises previously made to Moscow, and something that was pursued needlessly and recklessly by the Bush-Cheney administration in the early 2000s, with the disastrous consequences that we now see, and with this rigid and dogmatic position, which has no basis in reality, that there is some sort of NATO open door which must be defended at all costs. And by the way, when people in the West refuse to acknowledge the concept of indivisible security, when they talk about the business of the open door somehow trumping the idea of indivisible security, they are in effect rejecting the concept of indivisible security, which is deeply alarming for the Russians. So that is one. And the second thing was 8 years of refusing to implement either of the two Minsk agreements. And that has been in some ways the even bigger failure, because if the Minsk agreement had been implemented, we would have had a real prospect of peace in Ukraine.
All right. Nitsowich says, I blame the USA, also Europeans who couldn't bring Ukraine to talks with Donetsk and Lugansk.
Well, I completely agree, except, of course, I would go even further than this, because there's been some investigating by some journalists. Again, I'm going to be careful what I say here, but from what I've been able to understand, it seems that it's the US that's been basically encouraging Ukraine not to move forward with the Minsk agreement. It's been, in fact, trying to rewrite the Minsk agreement to make it the opposite of what it was intended to be.
All right. What could the U.S. allies do if they were acting sanely to score a win here?
Well, that's a very good question, actually, because, of course, they're now so extremely committed that it's very difficult to see how they could act sanely and at the same time score the kind of win that they're looking for. I think what they perhaps ought to do at this point is to try to call a stop and to dial the rhetoric down, and somebody taking people like Borrell to one side and Liz Truss to one side and telling them pipe down. I mean, they should have been doing that weeks ago, by the way, but I mean, this is the moment when that ought to have been done, and say, look, we've imposed all these sanctions. We've got to wait and see what we do. And at the same time, we've got to work to encourage these talks between the Russians and the Ukrainians. And if the outcome of those talks is that the Ukrainians agree to neutrality, which is for the Russians, an absolutely basic condition, then, we accept that. That would seem to me to be the best outcome. But some people will say that's appeasement, and we can't agree to that.
Okay. Why hasn't Russia retaliated? We kind of touched upon that.
Yeah.
When will Xi Jinping intervene?
Well, this is an excellent question. I mean, first of all, I think the Chinese will not intervene openly. I mean, they might provide Russia with economic support. I mean, they might, if things get difficult in the Russian economy, as I said, they won't want the Russian economy to collapse. So they will do what they can to avert that. And there's a huge amount that they can do. I mean, bear in mind, by purchasing power parity measures, they are the world's biggest economy. So they can do lots of things on that particular front. That's the first thing. The second thing they are doing, and somebody mentioned this on our live stream yesterday, and it's in Global Times, and I've discussed it previously, is that they seem to be maneuvering to put themselves in a position where they might agree to act as mediators, or might offer themselves as mediators. And it's, you know, one thing for Erdogan and Prime Minister Bennett of Israel and Tokayev, the Kazakh leader, and all these people to say, you know, we're prepared to offer our services as mediators. I mean, nobody, I think, takes that terribly seriously. But if China comes forward and does that, then it's a different situation. But I think that before that happens, I think the Chinese will wait to see how the situation on the ground evolves.
All right. I have a question. Why do you ignore the fact that the U.S. has the Russians where they want them? The entire media is painting them as the bad guys. Europeans bigger hawks than the U.S. Isn't this a victory for U.S. geopolitics? Moreover, one sec. Moreover, moreover, Russian leaders will be accused for war crimes. Within a few years, Putin will be overthrown by his own people with the support of the CIA. I see this developing like this. Surely you can't rule this out.
No, I can't. We don't rule this out. And in the short term, I think the United States has indeed made major geopolitical gains. I mean, they've destroyed the relationship between Russia and Europe, which was becoming, I think, concerning for them. They've imposed all these sanctions on Russia, which, from their point of view, I think they were probably, some people in the US wanted to achieve that. And, you know, there may be some people who hope that they will achieve regime change in Moscow. Though I have to say, I think that's extremely unlikely, very unlikely to happen. And countries which tend to be sanctioned in this kind of way, regime change doesn't really take place, unless, of course, the government is weak and its security services are disorganized, neither of which, in the case of Russia, seems to me to be the case. So I don't think that the last part of this is going to work. But the first part, I think there's a lot of truth to it. And can I also say that there being truth to it, it may, you have to accept this as a gain. We don't dispute that at all. I think we've essentially said that.
Well, we've said that. Yeah,
we've said that.
Exactly, we've said that the big losers are Europe, Ukraine, obviously, Europe. And the big winner is China, but the US has achieved various gains in the short term. I mean, we've actually said that, you know, canceling Nord Stream 2 and removing Russia, not only from Europe now, from the entire world stage, in the short term is a gain. Yes. What we question is the medium and long term with regards to the USD, the reserve currency, SWIFT, a parallel economic system. Anyway, go on.
Exactly. I mean, the thing the US should do is, having got, you know, chips, having collected some of its chips, it should leave the table.
Exactly.
This is the point to stop and cash in your gains. Exactly. If they go on putting more, then they're starting to risk what they've already won.
This is not about Ukraine, at least to 90% of it is really not about Ukraine. We've said it for a long time now. If you watched our videos, this is really about Europe, and specifically even more about Germany and Russia. They've achieved what they set out to do. The US has achieved their goal. They canceled Nord Stream 2 and they got Russia out of Europe. I agree. Take your winnings. Yes. And who cares about Ukraine? I'm saying, if I was advising the Biden White House, I would say it's okay. We got what we wanted. Yes, maybe we're going to lose Ukraine. But when you stack everything up, it's kind of like saying, okay, I went and I played roulette and I lost $100, but I played blackjack and I won $1,000. That's not bad. You know, I'm leaving with $900 in my pocket. I'm happy. You know, but they're not, the momentum is carrying this now. And that's what worries, I think, everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And we've said that in many videos, actually.
Yes.
And
yes.
People who have been following our lives,
Yes.
they know we've been saying that.
Yes.
Nitswitch says Ursula was not elected. Everybody knows that. But she behaves as if she is a goddess. How is this possible? Obviously hubris, but politically, how is this possible? We are not a democracy. We are not.
I can't add to that comment because that's absolutely right. For me, the thing that really shocked me was when Ursula was coming along and saying, that the people of Europe are going to have to, tighten their belts and there's going to be bad economic consequences for us. But, we must do that because, we have to stand up for democracy and all this. And of course, she is unelected. She's committing the people of Europe to economic hardship as an unelected official. And I find it baffling that she's is able and allowed to do that. The Chancellor of Germany comes along, who is accountable to the people of Germany through elections, and says, this is my policy. This is what I'm going to do because I think this is in Germany's interests and in your interests, and we're going to accept some loss, but we've got to pitch this fight. Well, I might disagree. I might think that's completely wrong, but he is a democratically elected leader. But Ursula, who elected her?
Yeah. It is the same old maxim and doctrine since the creation of NATO. Keep Russians out, Germany down, and hold on to hegemony by the US.
Absolutely. So true. It's a perfect example of this. I have to say, within Europe, the big loser is Germany. Again, these very provincial politicians who run Germany have screwed up horribly. Germany should have been the stabilizer. They should have been the people when all this hysteria started to build back in October, who should have come along and said, well, look, the Russians have their concerns. The situation in Ukraine isn't good. Let's sit down, talk, come to some real agreement, negotiate seriously, put Stoltenberg and people like that in their box, tell Boris Johnson and Liz Truss to shut up and maintain that bridge. But I knew it was all going wrong. I realized that this thing was spinning out of control when I was watching what was going on in the Munich Security Conference all of 2 weeks ago, because there were these weak leaders in Germany, people like, Baerbock and Habeck and Scholz himself, were just completely running away with themselves. They were just telling the audience what they thought the audience wanted to hear, and they were sacrificing German national interests and ultimately the interests of Europe.
All right. Brash says, thanks for the great coverage, guys. Thank you very much for that super chat. And switch over here. Locals. Elvira Nabalena, the head of Russian Central Bank, is playing a very important role now. She's considered as one of the best or the best central banker in the world.
Yeah. I read a brilliant piece about her and about what the central bank has done in the Daily Telegraph by Jeremy Warner. Now, I say that, I mean, he's a mainstream journalist. Nobody should accuse him of being any kind of Russian propagandist. He's a financial and economics journalist. He said that the central bank is doing all the right things. And he said he thought that hyperinflation in Russia, the danger of it is... it's not that it doesn't exist entirely, but that it's minimal.
All right. Let's see. In Russia's eyes, the West has been attacking them for centuries. Most recent time was the 1990s. The events now will only divide Russia from the West, certainly not turn Russians into meek, compliant sheep who will agree with the West knows best. The exact opposite. They will never forgive the West for what it is doing if they now try to destroy their country.
I think that is true of about 4/5 of Russians. I mean, I've seen an opinion poll, 73%. This is before, but I think that's probably hardened now. 73% supported Putin's announcement, 16% opposed it. I think even that 16% is going to dwindle. Where you will find the most articulate opposition to what the Russian government has just done, believe it or not, is amongst humanities academics in certain Russian universities. I say that as somebody who's had these kind of links, because those are the people who value most academic contacts with the West and are most exposed to Western viewpoints. But these are humanities academics, and we know they are articulate people, but I don't think they are reflective of Russian opinion as a whole. Russia will come through this economically. Of that, I am sure. I'm not actually terribly worried from a Russian point of view about the economic war, which is one reason I think why they're pulling their punches. I mean, they don't feel desperate enough to take some of the extreme steps that people are talking about. But the military, media, diplomatic conflict is dangerous. And if people start to take reckless steps like, engaging in military proxy wars, or God help us, going down the route of no-fly zones, then, I mean, really, we are, to say we're in trouble would be an understatement. I mean, it would be a disaster.
It would be a disaster, yeah. Have the Russians been losing lives?
Yes, and I can actually give some information about this.
Yeah, I was going to say, we have some numbers, yeah.
Yes, we actually have some numbers. Now, this has come from, this is yesterday, so I don't know what the position is today, but this is not directly from the Defense Ministry, but this is from a source which is extremely well informed within the Defense Ministry. And they said that the number up to yesterday was about 300, all told, which was, again, this source within the Defense Ministry said that it was slightly less, in fact, than they anticipated at this stage of the operation. Right. Now, I go on.
I just want to say that number 300, Alexander, we have to put an asterisk there to a certain extent, because from what I understand, that's counting Donetsk, Lugansk militia as well as the Russian Federation military.
Yes.
So we have to understand that there's from what I get, there's going to be probably a little higher percentage of those losses are probably on the Donetsk, Lugansk side.
I agree.
I mean, but that's all the armies. Yeah.
Yes. Now, the same source refused to be drawn about the numbers of people killed on the other side. He said that there were more. Now, this is a Russian source. You can believe it or not as you choose. I am not in a position to independently corroborate or verify it. I want to make that point very clear. But given the kind of fighting that's been going on, which has been of a relatively low level of intensity, it seems to me, it feels right. I'd say that. From what I've been able independently to see, I stress I'm not a military person, but it doesn't look to me like there's this huge clash of armies and things like this going on, and stories about Ilyushin 76 transport aircraft being shot down with all their paratroopers inside them. All of that, it seems, is just. I've never seen any evidence of that, and until I see evidence of it, I simply won't accept those stories as true. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Twitter's saying like 4,300. I heard that too. I was going through all kinds of media and Twitter, and I was actually watching Fox News, which is just doing a terrible job, and I include Tucker Carlson in that as well, who's doing a pretty bad job now covering this. But they were saying stuff like 5,000 Russian troops have been killed, 200 tanks destroyed, and I think they said 60 fighter jets have been downed. That's definitely not the case. A reliable number on the Ukraine side and I've gone through like 10 different sources, Alexander, is anywhere from 800 to 1,200. Yeah. It is somewhere in that range. And that's coming from Russian and from reliable Western or objective sources as well. 800 to 1,200. And you're exactly right. The 300 to 350 range is for the Russian Donetsk, Lugansk side of things. Those are what I believe to be pretty accurate numbers.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree. So, yeah.
Yeah. And this whole 5,000 and 50 fighter jets.
Yeah.
This is just ridiculous. Twitter is also just an absolutely terrible source of information.
Yes.
Absolutely terrible. Don't get anything from Twitter.
No,
it's really bad.
I mean, a lot of this is gossip and rumor and disinformation and misinformation. I also have to say it's an awful lot of people who are just making things up. Yeah. I'm sorry to say that straightforwardly, but I mean, they are.
Yeah. Brash says, these are historic broadcasts. So here's another super chat so I can be part of history. Thank you very much, Brash. These are historic times. Let's see. Moon Intro 68 says, Putin and co. must have understood this would wreck his relationship with the West. I could have told him the reaction he would get myself. This is an excellent question. Do you believe that Putin and his team understood the extent to which the relationship with the West would be severed? And when I mean extent, it's not only the central bank and the SWIFTs and the no-fly zones, even extending all the way to the athletic and cultural.
I know.
Do you think they ever thought it would get this far?
No, and here I have to say, I didn't think it would get that far. I mean, a situation where the International Olympic Committee is calling for a worldwide ban of participation by Russian athletes in sports competitions. I have to say, I never imagined. I would never have believed that. I find that, by the way, totally unethical and wrong, and a complete violation of the Olympics, of the Olympic spirit, the Olympic tradition, the whole concept of the Olympic Games, in which, by the way, my father was involved. I mean, he had some connections with the Olympic movement. I mean, he'd been horrified at all of this. I think it's a betrayal of all of that. And it shows again how dangerous hysteria is and how people end up doing things that they would frankly regret. Can I just point out that when there was the 1968 and 1972 Olympics, during the Vietnam War, nobody quite properly and suggested that there should be worldwide ban on the participation of the United States American athletes in Olympic Games. And nobody suggested it. And had anybody done so, it would have been considered an outrageous thing to demand. So I don't think Putin could have imagined that. On the economics, I think he pretty much expected it all. I think his advisors expected it all. And if you'd sat through that discussion in the Security Council, you'd followed the video from end to end, as I did, then you would have seen that they were perfectly, they'd clearly been talking about this thing for weeks. There'd clearly been an intense and involved discussion. And I'm sure all the economics people had been brought in and had discussed it as well. And I think they'd all accepted that it was going to come to this if they took this decision. The thing to say about this, and this is the other thing that struck me very much from both the discussions at the Security Council and from Putin's various addresses, is that the Russians have had it, he has had it, as far as he's concerned, up to there. Now, I mean, he's absolutely fed up with negotiations with the West. He makes points to them, he comes up with proposals, he explains his concerns, which are Russia's concerns. The West politely listens and then does the opposite, pays no attention. And I think the point finally came when the Russians decided, well, we have to act now, or if we don't act now, you know, we're going to face a far worse situation in a few years. And I think they've been explaining that to all their friends, to the Chinese, to the Indians, and to all sorts of others. And I think they've had a receptive, people have been are receptive to that argument. That was certainly my impression of it. I mean, Putin did not come across to me as somebody who was wanting this.
All right. Droid said, how significant is the Western media's almost complete non-reporting on the operations in Donbass?
It's completely significant because it gives you a completely distorted view of what's going on. If you go to the British media today, they are focusing on two places, Kiev and Kharkiv. That's all. What's going on in the Donbass is, way back sort of bottom page, you can find a little admissions about some of the things there, even though that is where the real battle is happening.
Yeah.
Kiev, of course, may change based on what Alex said earlier in the program.
Nina Mikatorena says, who is making the Russian military decisions? How much input does Putin have? Of course, there are consultations, but I wonder whose plan and endgame this is.
I think Putin is heavily involved. I think he is deeply involved in all the decisions. I don't think that this is a political leader who isn't engaged. And I think some of the decisions that he makes, some of the military people are deeply unhappy with. I mean, his decision on Saturday, for example, to order a stop, to give time for negotiations. I get the sense that was deeply unpopular and heavily criticized. But we know roughly who's making the decisions. There'll be Putin, the defense minister, who is Shoigu, and the general staff.
Yeah, it's official. Europe won't transfer fighter jets to Ukraine. Poland decided not to, and Slovakia defense ministry spokesman confirms to me just now, Slovakia will not provide fighter jets to Ukraine.
Well, I think in that case, Borrell should resign. I mean, to float that idea, yes, without consulting these countries was irresponsible, and I think he should resign.
All right. Putin's empire of lies, I think, is reference to Solzhenitsyn's live not by lies.
Absolutely. It's exactly what it is. I'm not saying that he's wrong. I'm saying that it might not be the most diplomatically wise thing to say at this moment. If at some point going forward, you want to start talking to people like Macron and Scholz again. Right. I mean, I know a lot of people won't agree with me about this, by the way, but that's my own personal view.
Okay, two comments with regards to the U.S. media and how they're taking this. I think more people in the U.S. are seeing this conflict as never let a crisis go to waste, and faith in the mainstream media and government after the whole coup situation is tanking in the West.
I think, tanking in much of the West. More in the United States than elsewhere. The United States is this extraordinary country. I mean, I never fully give up on it. It's always got much more open debate than you will find in Europe. It's got a democratic tradition. It's got terrible controls, oligarchy controlling the social media, all those sort of things. But in the US, you find resistance. You find opposition. You find people who set up not just alternative websites, but alternative platforms. How many alternative platforms have been created in Europe? Name me one.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Europe, there's no doubt about that Europe has completely gone lockstep with everything that's being pumped out. And once again, I'm not saying what's being pumped out is wrong or right or good or bad. I'm just saying after Russiagate, Ukrainegate, Orange Man bad, January 6th, and most importantly, after the coup, the Freedom Convoy, after seeing all of these things happening and then seeing the same exact people and institutions and media companies doing the same exact thing with regards to this conflict, Europeans, and I say Greeks, specifically Greeks, a lot of Greeks are completely lockstep with the narrative. Absolutely. And it's almost like the last 2 years never happened.
Well, exactly.
I mean, never happened.
Exactly.
It's really bizarre.
But, just to talk about our platform hosts, ODYSEE and Rumble, and, locals where we all also appear. Where are the European equivalents to Rumble, ODYSEE, and locals? Just name me one.
Yeah.
And I mean, that comes, and that's the difference between these. America has this tremendous entrepreneurial dynamism and energy amongst its people, and it also has this tradition of democracy and open debate. We don't have it in Europe, and we've never needed it more, and it's leading us to disaster. In fact, as I said on previous live streams, this event, however it turns out, is the irrevocable moment. It's the moment when Europe, as a continent, as a civilization, went into irrecoverable decline.
All right. T. Gagiotti says, thank you for your work, guys. Thank you very much for that. And let's jump here to Locals, what the hell is Mitsotakis doing? I've always said that Greece has more to gain by having good relations with Russia, and in that way, maybe get out from being under the thumb of the EU and the US. I'm not a religious person, but even by invoking the Brotherhood of Orthodoxy.
Well, Alex, you're the person who can answer this brilliantly because you've answered it so many times.
I think we've said it. Greece, since Piat came into town, it was game over. And that also includes the decision with North Macedonia and all kinds of decisions. It was over. It was over when Piat came in here. And Piat came in here with an agenda to basically just whatever he did in Ukraine, to drive Ukraine away from Russia. He did the same thing in Greece.
Absolutely.
And he severed those ties.
Absolutely. He's a very, very skillful man. Let's never underestimate him.
That's his specialty.
That's his specialty.
Yeah, that's what they bring him into countries to do. Let's see. Russia's government will spend up to 1 trillion rubles to buy shares of companies that have been sanctioned.
Yes. So it's a covert nationalization, not overt nationalization. It's converting into a controlled economy, which is, of course, what many people have been wanting in Russia all along. By the way, that's a point I should make. When you look at opinion polls in Russia, there has been a consistent majority in Russia for a controlled economy over a free market economy. I mean, I'll correct that, a globalized economy. These moves will ultimately be popular.
What could cause China to invade Taiwan?
What could cause China to invade Taiwan? Well, the Chinese have already said any move by Taiwan to declare itself independent, that is one thing. Any move by Taiwan to develop nuclear weapons, which I understand some very foolish people have floated. Any move by the United States to recognize Taiwan as independent, and any move by the United States to move troops into Taiwan, or conceivably even to extend security guarantees to Taiwan. The Chinese have been very clear that they have a whole host of red lines. By the way, if that happens, if we, I mean, this is Ukraine thing is
nothing
titanic, but Taiwan will dwarf it. Bear in mind how important Taiwan. I mean, Ukraine is it's not insignificant to the world economy because it's such an important raw materials and food producer. But I mean, Taiwan is just absolutely seminal. It's vastly richer as well.
I think the gulf between what we're being shown and what we're being told is becoming too wide to bridge. I'm not sure the narrative can hold up much longer. The corporate media in the US has spent the last few years waging a propaganda war against the part of the American population that they now expect will cheer on some great showdown with Russia and also go fight and die when required. Turns out that those Americans don't believe the corporate media anymore. Funny that.
I think there is a lot of truth in what you've just said about the United States. I've said that. We've been discussing this in this program. In Europe, I'm afraid it's different. I mean, it's not to deny that there aren't lots of people in Europe who are horrified by what's going on and who are appalled by the way the European Union operates and who disagree profoundly by the policies that have been followed, which have led to this disaster. But they are inconsequential. They've been marginalized. And so far, it looks as if they will continue to be marginalized. And as I said, this is the death of Europe. It's its suicide.
Yeah. Whereas China won't need to invade Taiwan. It will gradually take it over.
Well, I would not be 100% sure about that myself. Possibly. Let's see.
Do you believe Putin is unhinged, or is he putting on a show to worry other leaders?
The madman theory, which was attributed to Richard Nixon. I don't think he's unhinged at all. I don't think he is putting on a show to alarm other leaders. I'm going to say this again. I said this previously. His two speeches, which people talked about in the West as being, you know, ranting and raving and all that sort of thing, didn't come across that like that at all to most Russians who were listening, because, of course, they are receptive to those arguments. They've been hearing those arguments. They've been hearing they know all about this with NATO. And, of course, they know about Ukraine. So for them, it carried a lot of traction. And it was to Russians that he was speaking. Now, I would add that especially in his first speech, the one after the Security Council meeting, he did look tired, which, given that, you know, the night before he'd been talking to Macron until 2 o'clock in the morning and had then to have this long Security Council meeting, it's completely unsurprising. But he's neither mad or irrational or deranged or any of these things, and he's not putting on an act. He is acting the way I think he always has acted. That's my own personal view, which doesn't mean that, you know, he's going to be able to keep control of the situation as it exists now.
In my opinion, the ferocity of the info war reflects their fear of the actual war. However, I don't think anyone knows how the trade war will work out. In the long term, I don't see how the East can lose. They have the resources and make the shiny things.
Yes, you know, I agree with that. And I think they can handle any narrative that comes out of the war itself. I mean, if Ukraine loses, you know, if all resistance collapses tonight, which I don't expect, but I'm just giving an extreme scenario. If, you know, the resistance collapses, Zelensky gives in, he and Putin meet, they sign a treaty, the Western media can still spin that narrative. They can do that. The economic war is different, because the economic war affects people directly. It's the kind of thing that already people in the West are experiencing. I've said my energy bills on the 1st of April are growing by 54%. And that's going to happen right across Europe. And I think Britain is actually one of the less affected countries. So that's, I think, in Europe, what is making them nervous. And that's the narrative that they may feel nervous that they can't sustain. The military one, they can spin it any way they want. Let me repeat an example, which I've never forgotten, which was about Tiananmen Square. I mean, in the lead up to the Chinese crackdown in Beijing in 1989, I remember article after article saying the Chinese army wouldn't be able to do it. The military is divided. The political system is on the brink of collapse. Then it turned out otherwise. They spent a week spreading stories about the fact that the Chinese army had split and that there was fighting going on in Beijing, all of which was completely untrue. And did people lose faith in the media as a result, at least in Europe? No, it was all as if, you know, all that commentary, all those hours and miles of commentary had never happened. And if you try and find it now, you won't find it. It's just vanished.
Yeah, I agree with that. They can spin anything, Alexander. They can spin anything. Yeah. Do you think it is at all possible that the partitioning of Ukraine has secretly been agreed between Biden, the EU, and Putin? Western Ukraine becomes neutral, like Austria, but is allowed to enter the EU. Eastern Ukraine becomes Novorossiya, a buffer state similar to Belarus. In my honest opinion, everyone would get something out of this.
You know, one would like to believe that. I mean, well, I don't say because, you know, I say like to believe that because people in Ukraine might take strong exception to that statement, because after all, we're talking about their country. But I would like to believe that leaders are able to talk to each other and come up with these, to be straightforward, cynical but realistic solutions. In the 18th and 19th centuries, that's exactly what they did. Look at our leaders today. I mean, I don't really see that there's any possibility of those discussions going on, at least not at a senior level. Maybe, you know, very low levels, there are people talking to each other, but Biden and Putin coming to that kind of implicit agreement, I don't believe it. I wish they did talk to each other in those sort of ways, but I don't think they are.
What are your thoughts
doesn't
about
mean that doesn't mean, by the way, that the outcome that you've described may not happen. That's a realistic outcome, but as a possible outcome, but that it's been agreed like that in advance, I don't see it.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about the latest Western media talking point that Putin has gone mad? Half of the U.S. population saw the media level that exact charge against Trump for years and knew it was a lie. It's over for the truth makers.
They always say that. They say that about any leader they don't agree with.
Orban's a dictator. Putin's mad. Trump is
Assad,
crazy.
Assad is mad. I remember reading articles.
Assad is mad.
Mad.
Assange is a spy. Assange is a spy. Is a Putin spy. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, you know, they say all those things. To be honest, that's about, I think, the one thing that people, even in Europe, are cynical about. Actually,
which.
The Putin is mad narrative. I don't think they believe that Putin is mad.
I'll go back to Tucker. I saw his show from last night, and he's saying it too. That Putin's. You know, that's the problem. That's why we're in this mess. To be honest, we're in this mess because the media creates this Hollywood superhero, supervillain caricature of all of these people, of all of these leaders around the world. When, in my opinion, the only caricature that I see around the world is Biden. I mean, Biden to me is, he's lost. He's absolutely lost.
Yeah. Yes.
And Ursula von der Leyen and all these people are feckless. But when you go around, Trump is this and Putin is this, and they create these supervillains.
Narcissists.
And they don't stop, and they just keep on pounding away at it.
I know.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And unfortunately, a lot of people buy it. And that's why we're in this mess.
Yeah.
You know, these are just people. And we've said it many times, they've made Putin out to be something much more than what he really is.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's a very good point, by the way. I mean, you know, Putin is many things, but we mustn't mythologize him. Yeah. He's not this, he's not Sauron. He's not on that kind of level. I mean,
it's crazy what they've done. Anyway, let's see here. Let me find some more questions here, Alexander. We'll go on for a little bit more. What about Kaliningrad?
Well, what about Kaliningrad?
Well, cut off. I mean, there's talk that it is cut off by land, so they can't get to it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. By sea, they can get to it.
Yeah, they can get to it by sea.
Yeah, but now it has been essentially cut off by land and flights going.
Well, I mean, it has been, but I mean, they could still get to it by sea. I think they could probably still get to it by flights. Actually, they could probably fly over the border. Anyway, I mean,
I don't. Do
you think not? Anyway,
what if they try to cut it off? What if they do try to cut it off? Is that an act of war?
Well, that would be an act of war, which is why I don't think they'll do it.
Yeah, and even if they run into trouble, they may carve out something there to let flights get in. Yeah.
Yes. To be entirely honest, the one thing which I think, if this whole thing does settle down, will probably be reversed fairly quickly are these mutual flight bans, because they're so disadvantageous. I mean, I'm not saying that
disadvantages to Europe.
To Europe, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. It's about the one thing I'm not saying it's going to happen, but of all the sanctions, it's the one that I think would be easiest to drop, because it inconveniences people so much.
Yeah, and Europe is at a disadvantage compared to Russia.
Yeah,
they'll just take Aeroflot and they'll just reroute the place to go to all kinds of other places. Europe, though, they won't be able to access Asia. That's going to kill a lot of airlines. Yeah.
Exactly.
I agree with that. Who are the adults in the room during this hysteria? Which man in the Pentagon or NATO?
Well, I think that there are some very sensible people, actually. I think there really are in the uniformed military in the United States, rational people. That's the trouble. I think that's just about where it stops. Within the political class, both in the United States and, I mean, in Europe, it's disastrous. In the United States, very few level-headed people left.
All right. We'll go on for another 5 minutes, Alexander.
Yeah.
We got some more questions lined up and talk for another 5 minutes. I remember when Putin had cancer. He's been through a lot.
Well, that's never been confirmed.
We're saying Tweak is saying the
I
BS,
see. Yes,
the BS, it's just,
I understand. Yeah.
Imagine if John McCain were still alive.
Oh. Just as well he isn't. I shouldn't say that about somebody, but I mean, no, I'm very relieved he's not around.
Yeah, well, people forget his role in Ukraine and the Maidan.
Absolutely.
He gave a speech there. Can you imagine if during the Black Lives Matters protest, Peskov ended up in Portland or in Seattle and said, people of Seattle, now is your time to rise up and overthrow your government.
I know.
That's essentially what happened in 2014.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. It's exactly what happened.
All right. Let's see. Let me go here to Rumble and pick a couple of more questions and we'll wrap it up here. Or Locals or Odyssey. It would be so European to forcibly remove the people from Kaliningrad. Yeah. It seems that Europe is going full authoritarian on all fronts.
Oh, absolutely, yes. It's the most disturbing thing of all. And authoritarian and homogenous, which of course it never was. And the reason European civilization achieved such extraordinary heights was because of its diversity, and that's being choked.
Yeah. No one talks about Yemen. The war's still going on. 300. How many? 300,000 people have been killed. No one cares.
Well, absolutely. Well, nobody cares. Absolutely, of course not. I mean, fighting in many places around the world. In the Arab world, one of the reasons the Arab world is apparently extremely isn't supportive. Even pro-Western Arab governments are looking upon this whole thing with extreme cynicism. Is, of course, because they compare what happened in their own region and the violence they've experienced there from the Western powers. And they contrast that with the way the Western powers are responding when something like this happens in Europe. And of course, it's far worse in the Arab world. There's no comparison. If you remember, I said 2004, when the armies marched. Was it 2003 or 2000? I never can remember.
2003.
2003, when the U.S. military and the British military marched on Baghdad. Remember shock and awe and how they took out all the the media places and went for the whole civilian facilities and all this sort of thing. I mean, it was on a far more violent scale, and the way in which that is somehow considered less important than the fact that there is fighting in Kiev is, I think many Arabs are very deeply upset and deeply annoyed about it. Yeah,
or the fact that through the whole war with Yemen, we haven't seen anything come down on Saudi Arabia at all.
No, nothing.
And we are talking, I think the number is correct, 300,000 people have been killed. I think that is the correct number.
Absolutely, yes.
We haven't seen anything.
Nothing.
Not one sanction.
No.
Saudi Arabia's football club is still playing. I mean, nothing.
Exactly. Nothing, yeah, quite.
One sec here. Gosh, I had a question here all lined up and now I lost it. Gonzalo is fine. You can go to his Telegram and he pretty much explains everything, because there are a lot of people who are just probably came in late. We explained everything in the beginning of the of the stream as to what's going on there. But just go to his Telegram or his YouTube, actually.
Yeah.
And you'll get info on Gonzalo. And take one or two questions. Anyone have one or two questions and we'll wrap it up? Do you think some bright spark in the U.S. administration will think outside the box and attempt a Nixon to China gambit? Do you think if the U.S. caved on literally everything, China would break it off with Russia?
I don't think there's going to be a Nixon moment or anything like that. There's nothing that suggests anything like that to me at the moment. And I don't think there's anything that either the Chinese or the Russians will do which will compromise their relationship. It's too important for each. So I don't expect anything like that happening, to be truthful. There isn't the imagination and there isn't the will.
All right. Davil says, thanks, Alex. I was trying to forget Wet Star Johnny. we all want to forget it. Let's see what happened to your videos. We explained that in the beginning of this stream.
Yeah.
Alexander, I think perhaps it's high time to look into the economic motives behind the U.S. scripted and directed Russia invasion in Ukraine.
Well, I think that if you're talking about economic motives, if you're thinking about this being about increasing American supplies of LNG to Europe, well, there may be something in that. But I think overall, beyond that, it's geopolitics. Where I should say Americans, where the neocons, where people like this pursue particular policies, you always find that their material interests align incredibly closely with their geopolitical objectives. So more LNG exports to Europe, more arms sales to Europe. And if you think that it's a coincidence that the Germans have now announced this massive increase in defense spending, and most of which they will go to buying weapons from the United States. If you think this is a coincidence, well, I have a bridge to sell you. Probably there's been talk about this going on behind the scenes. I'm guessing for years that they've been pushing the Germans to go in that direction.
All right, final question from Alid. Will Ukraine be split in two?
It's not impossible. Look, I don't want to predict that. Viscerally, I hate it when countries divide, but it may happen. It might even be for the best.
Morality aside, what are the long-range goals of the U.S. here? We described some of the thinking there. I think right now the goal is regime change in Russia. Right now, I agree.
I mean
they're going for it. This is their big push. Yeah.
Yes, I think this is their big push. I'm going to say something else. I think if you're talking about the globalization project, if you're talking about the unipolarity, all of that, this is the last big push. This is the last throw to get the project back on track. If they lose, if Russia is still standing, the government hasn't fallen, the economy is still functioning, and Ukraine is pacified, then whatever linkages between Russia and Europe have been broken, the underlying dynamics will start to work their way through, and we'll see that the point of maximum globalization, the globalization project will have finally and conclusively ended. It's that. So I mean, this is we've been leading up to this moment, and it's come. Yeah. And this is the pivot.
Yeah. Real quick, Alexander, painting Robert Rauschenberg, because many people ask me that. So that's that. There's a comment here from someone on ODYSEE who said, as an Arab, I can confirm that we see the Western hypocrisy in Ukraine. They murdered millions of our people and hardly any peep from the Western MSM about the crimes committed by the West. So thank you for that insight.
Well, indeed, yeah.
And one sec, Alexander, one second. And I think, and on, what were you saying on your point about the globalism? Yes, regardless what you think of the war, who's at fault, which side, who's to blame, who you're with, I definitely think one of the overarching narratives here is globalism versus multipolar world. And there's no doubt about it that if the strategy pays off for the collective West, then globalism is full speed ahead, and that's it. We are in a globalist society, no doubt about that, because they're going to decimate Russia. They are going to pick it apart, and they're going to balkanize it, and they're going to grab all the resources, and they're going to focus on China. But globalism is going to be cemented, and that's why you see such a freak out. I think that's one of the motivating factors of all the hysteria, is that I think the van der Leyen's and the Macrons and the Bidens, to a certain extent, that Biden understands this. Anyway, they all understand the real fight here. And if Russia gets its way, then globalism has been dealt a lethal blow. It may not be immediate, but it's done. And anyway, any final thoughts, Alexander?
No, I mean, that's it. I mean, that is it for the day. I mean, we're going to see what's going on. I mean, we're still very much in this crisis at the moment. I've been keeping track on things in the markets. Things are sagging everywhere. As I said, the ruble hasn't crashed. I mean, you remember they were talking about last week on Sunday that, the ruble would go into free fall. It hasn't yet happened. But I want to just say again, with currencies, attacks on currencies, if a currency is being targeted for attack, that can come at any time. So the fact that it's steadied isn't a sign that everything is over there. So we'll see what happens. This is a hard, big slog. It's the three-sided conflict: war, information, and finance. The war, well, we've talked about that. I think the Russians have probably got I'm sure they're winning there. The information war, US has won. I mean, unequivocally. Whatever happens, they'll be able to spin it. But the impression of this evil dictator launching this, his armies against a democratic, peaceful country, which is all. I mean, I remember Boris Johnson actually said that, Ukraine is a democratic, peaceful country. A ludicrous mischaracterization to anybody who knows the place. But nobody's challenging it. So that's the narrative that's been established in the minds of people in Europe. And the third is the financial war, maybe ultimately the most important one. And we will see where that goes.
All right. Dub Fractal, thank you for your super chat. The Western response is white privilege. Correct. And very good point. And Engineers One, thank you for your super chat as well. Thank you. We thank you as well. And finally, Alexander, has Ukraine ever been a viable entity? Not that I remember. Maybe at one point when it first broke off, it was actually better off way back then. Yes. And it's been downhill ever since.
It could have succeeded. It had all the potential to succeed. I mean, it's a tragedy that it failed so completely.